Well, hello all. I'm going to pull these trees down and try and make a bit of a stealth shelter. I've just arrived at my lovely stealth shelter. I'm going to set up my bedding once I've cooked my meal. We've got a stove. It's very stealthy. The only thing that can give us away is making a noise or a light. So we've got a can, bread, we've got the whole 9 yards here to make a delicious hamburger. Got my pan. Let's stoke her up. Bit of oil. Now, as I say, this shelter was so stealthy, I kept on losing it and not being able to find it. That's how stealthy it was. So, it is really stealthy, and as I say, the only thing that can make it so that people find us is if we make light and noise. So we'll try not to speak too loudly, make too much noise, make too much light. I think it's light enough still to be seen on the video. We may have to put a bit of light in just now, So we're making some onion for our hamburger. People walk their dogs here, but not so much now that it's near sunset. So we've also got our mince. Lovely piece of mince. I didn't bring too much in the way of cutlery and crockery. Let's cover that and just let it simmer for a while. I always like to talk about something, and you know, we do serve a God who has a personality. Christ had his own personality when he was on earth, and I thought it'd be of great interest to consider what type of personality our Lord Jesus had and what kind of personality God has. So you might say, well, we can't tell, but we can tell. I'm a great fan of stealth camping. I'm in this beautiful stealth shelter. Just have a look. There's the door. There's the skylight. Here You can see it all around us. Here is our food cooking. There is up to the skylight. So this is what our stealth camping hut looks like from the outside. It's very almost unnoticeable. Here is the entrance to it, and you can see it's gorgeous inside. I just want to show you all the way around it. Here is the front of it. So that's what it looks like from one side. Here's our stealth shelter. This is the Port Jackson we're cutting down, but just have a look how when it's cut down, how beautiful the natural flowers look. These are quite rare, but look how beautiful they are. And just look at the color all the way around where we've hacked. And then that is how it looks where we don't hack. It's all covered with alien. Here is the road, and there is our shelter. And we're super stealthy. But I think it was Dan, who was it? Dan something or other, who said that God must be a cowboy at heart. But I want to say God and Jesus is a stealth camper at heart. He spent 3.5 years stealth camping, walking from town to town. They didn't book in at inns. They didn't have the internet to book ahead. There's no mention of him ever booking into an inn. But there's plenty of mention of him, for example, sleeping on the Mount of Olives, which is where they finally arrested him. And Christ was so stealthy that the scribes and Pharisees had to pay Judas 30 pieces of silver, which is the price of a field, a whole piece of land, a potter's field, just that he could kiss Christ and identify him. That's how ordinary Christ looked. Didn't look like the hippie pictures of long hair, and you see him among the 12, you can tell exactly which one's Jesus. No. It was very hard for people to tell Jesus, and very often Jesus was slipped in and out of the crowd, totally unnoticed. And there's so many instances of this happening. I mean, there's the case, I think it's in John 7, where he went back to Nazareth and started berating the Nazareans for their lack of belief, because they said, isn't this just a carpenter's son? They had zero respect for him. And he said, there were lots of Gentiles in Israel, but God went to the Gentiles and healed the leper Nathan, and lived with the widow of Zarephath. That was Elijah. And they got infuriated with him that they wanted to take him to the brow of a hill called the Mount of Precipice and throw him over the edge, and he just walked among them, and they couldn't see him, they couldn't differentiate him. So maybe it was a miracle that God hid Christ from their eyes, but Christ was on the wanted list. There were posters out, wanted Christ, and they wanted him to arrest him because the Jews considered him a threat to themselves. But no one arrested him because he went stealthily from town to town, and they could not at any stage tell exactly where he would be, because he was surrounded by his 12 disciples, and they just slept under a tree wherever they were. And no one knew exactly where Jesus was, and he stayed away from Judea, which is where the Pharisees had most of their power and control. And in Capernaum and on the shores of Galilee, he was very hard to find. So Christ's personality is stealth. For the first 30 years of his life, Nobody even knew of him. In Nazareth, they despised him because they said, wasn't this just the carpenter's son? So he lived under the radar stealthily. And when Jesus' mother at the wedding of Cana said to Jesus, do something about this shortage of wine, he was like slightly miffed that he didn't want to come into the limelight yet. He said, my time has not yet come. But he listened to his mother and he turned the water into wine, which was his first miracle. But he was reluctant to assume the spotlight. And then what's the first thing that Jesus does after he is baptized by John, the stealth camper? John lived in the wilderness, and John lived on wilderness food, which is locusts and wild honey. So John was a stealth camper, and he had this coat of camel hair, which was like great for the great warm coat. It was, like a bivy bag. It was his raincoat. It was everything. And you have to have really weatherproof clothing. And Christ had a very expensive robe that was also perfect for stealth camping, just like, that's what people did. They just slept in their clothes. And that's how Christ lived for 3.5 years in his robe, walking from place to place. And wherever they found themselves, they would lie down. And if the crowds got too much, Jesus would go into the wilderness, and if the crowds followed him, he'd go onto a mountain, or he'd take a boat and cross the sea and go to the other side, to Decapolis, I think it's called, and into the wilderness there where people to escape the crowd. So Christ was at heart stealthy, but then his ministry called for him interacting with people, and so then he would have to come back into the crowds, interact, heal, be thronged by them, and everyone wanted a piece of him and wanted to be healed, etc. And then he would retreat back into his stealthy way of doing things. Let's have a look how this food is doing. So, that looks like it's probably doing okay. I need another hand to hold this. Just put it down here. Just turn it over. So that's cooking nicely. It's supposed to be a hamburger, but we'll just put it onto the bread. The onions and the mince can cook all by themselves. Yum, yum. I think that flame might be a touch low, not that it matters. So, there were times when Jesus would do things and tell people, he told his disciples, don't tell everyone that I'm the Messiah. When he healed that beggar by the pool who'd been lame for 38 years or something like that, he just came, healed the guy and disappeared. And that was I know there were porticos there, and there used to be a huge crowd waiting for the angel to stir the water. But Christ came in, healed the guy and disappeared, and the guy didn't even know who it was until Jesus met him in the temple and said who it was. Just want to get out my torch. I think it's getting a bit dark now. So Jesus could be quite stealthy even with healing. And then I'm thinking too, like with the Transfiguration, he was on a high mountain, and when he went through the Gentile areas to that widow by the well, or that woman by the well who had 5 husbands, that was probably a very untraveled route by the Jews, because the Jews didn't like to go into Samaritan areas, so that was a way of escaping. Go where the Jews don't want to go, who were hounding and persecuting him, and so on. But even if you look at Jesus' early life, I mean, he was born in a manger in Bethlehem. Nobody knew about this birth except the Magi, or the many wise men who came from the east. It doesn't say three, but they brought 3 gifts. And then they were warned by God, who wanted to keep Jesus stealthy as possible, to not go back and tell Herod where he was. And then God gets some shepherds who are nobodies to come and worship the baby Jesus that was born. And then nobody cares about shepherds. They go back to doing their shepherding because the sheep can't be left. And then Jesus goes to live in Egypt for a while to escape persecution from Herod, who kills all the newborn babies. So there's a lot of stealth going on. And then Joseph, when he comes back, sees that there's the same sort of problem of Herod. And then he goes and stays for a while, hides in Nazareth, doesn't... I forget, but he went stealthily back home when the threat from Herod had passed. And then he lives quietly as a carpenter, Jesus as the carpenter's son, for 30 years. And this is stealth. And I mean, look around you today. Can you find Jesus or God? You say, of course not. They're hidden, they're spiritual, they're invisible. That's stealth. That is perfect stealth. And God could sign right in the sky, I am God, worship me. But he doesn't. He lives quiet, stealthy, hidden life, as does Jesus. And when Jesus came back, he only seemed to appear to believers, not to the unbelieving. He didn't come and advertise, hey, look at me, you guys. He didn't go to the chief Pharisees and Jews, or to the Romans and say, look, the guy you killed, I've been raised. He came quietly to his disciples. And look, on the Sunday he was resurrected, he walks with 2 disciples who don't recognize him. He's traveling again stealthily. And when he gets to the evening, he breaks bread and they recognize it's Jesus. And when he was resurrected at the tomb, Mary didn't recognize him. Again, stealthy. It was just the way he said to her, Mary, that awakened her to the idea, oh, this is Jesus. So Jesus did obviously change slightly as the resurrected Jesus. But even after his resurrection, he was fairly scarce. And he appeared to many thousands of people at various times. He would appear into the room with the disciples and show Thomas, for example, his hands after Thomas doubted, etc., etc. But Jesus was still fairly scarce and remains fairly scarce today. And throughout the Old Testament, which was the first half of the Bible, you find that the word of the Lord, which is Jesus Christ, appeared to many people. It's actually double Yahweh in the Hebrew. It's actually Christ incarnate appeared to these people and spoke to them. Abram, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and many others, the prophets. He would actually appear to them and speak to them. And he wrestled with Jacob, put his hip out, and so on. So that was actually Jesus. And walking in the Garden of Eden, it was Jesus as well, because the Bible says that no man has seen the Father, but Adam and Eve walked with Jesus at times. And then after they listened to Satan and ate that forbidden fruit, Jesus became scarce again and stealthy, and it wasn't very often or all the time that humans could interact with Jesus and with God, although there were times that Cain and Abel could bring offerings to God, but he became more and more scarce to humans. And as we see today, and as it was before the flood and after the flood in his interactions with Israel, God was scarce. So God is stealthy. For some reason, God likes to stay hidden. And I think it's to do with faith, or it could be But I mean, look at the personality trait of Jesus, who is stealthy. So, but you see it continuing in God remaining hidden from mankind, and as I say, not sign writing it in the sky, I am God, worship me. He remains fairly stealthy. Let's see how our food is doing. I think we've got everything we need here. So, how are we going to film this? Let's put, I think, this back here. And let's take this down. Let's see if it's cooked. It's doing quite nicely. I would say could do with just a touch more, because there's quite a lot in here. So let me show you what the food looks like. What I'm thinking of doing is making a gravy for this. Yum, yum. So, as you can see, that's cooking nicely. And I think we could just leave the lid on that. And then I think just now I want to make a bit of gravy to go with it, and then I'm going to put it on some bread. So, what can I conclude from the personality of Christ, which is stealthy most of the time, and then when he appears to people, there's God business that has to be done, like talking to the prophets or talking to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or Adam and Eve at first, or one of the prophets, or appearing to the people, speaking to them, but then he would withdraw from the crowds. It was almost like he was very busy, super busy, maximizing his time with the crowds, and then he would withdraw for many long periods of time and disappear and go to another town. But what can one get? What conclusion can I possibly draw from this? I think this all plays into the thing that by faith, meaning faith is the substance of things not seen. Faith is the, what does Hebrews 11 say, is the substance of things not seen, the evidence of, anyway, it's to do with things not seen. So not seen is stealth. So Christ requires us to have faith, to not seeing him, believe in him. So that is one point. I think there's a humility, huge humility about Christ. He never tried to come and say, look at me, and I am, like celebrities do. They want to be seen, they want to be in the limelight. Christ never wanted to be in the limelight. So there's a huge humility I see there with Christ. So there's the humility aspect of it. What else would I gather from this personality? I would say that because Christ is fairly low-keyed and laid back and not vaunting and puffing himself and putting himself forward, that I think led to Satan and a third of the angels despising him. And, if there's one thing that Satan's very good at, is he wants to be puffed up and to be in the limelight and full of pride and arrogance and if Satan could be seen and worshipped, which is going to be in the end time through the beast and the false prophet, he would jump at that. And it, in fact, was his original sin, which was, you see, he wanted to be like the Most High. Jesus doesn't want to be like the Most High. That's one of the wonderful things about him. He's happy to sit on the right hand of the Father till the Father makes every knee bow to him. And there's a kind of humility there. There's a stealthiness that Christ is out of the picture until the end time. I mean, Christ sits on the right hand of the Father and directs the operations here on earth, but it's not like we see him. We see, and he gets credit for everything he does. Now, I've got some water in here. I've got some gravy powder and a stock cube. And what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to throw out some of this water. I've got too much of it, I think. I'm going to put this little beef stock cube into the cold water. So I'm going to just break it up into the water. And then I've got some gravy powder. Okay. Well, I didn't know that, but it's not terribly much of it, but it'll all be good. So let's put that in to cook. I'm going to see how, with my limited number of hands, how I can, let's just take the lid off again. So here it is. There's our bit of gravy powder and a stock cube. That's just to thicken it a bit. Give it a bit of added flavour. So that looks like it's thickening up quite nicely. Yum, I'm getting quite hungry looking at this. So now we're going to put it onto some bread. Right, I think we can turn the heat off. And well, it's not quite a ham. I was gonna make a hamburger, but I've got a mince. Oh yeah, I've got some mince, and I've remembered I've got some cheese. So, let's see how that is. And I've got some salt if necessary. Can't tell you how delicious this is. I don't think that took longer than 15-20 minutes. Excuse that. String of onion. But that is so delicious. It's almost completely dark. So tonight is going to be pitch black. And where are that's hot. And where I live at the moment, there's load shedding, or the power's been switched off for 2 hours, so it's going to be especially dark, which means we're going to be able to see the stars beautifully. That was so nice. Let's plate up some more. I think I've overcated a little bit, but that just means we're not going to go hungry. And we got breakfast, something for breakfast. We can put the cheese on. So that's pretty nice. Just the right amount of salt. The gravy added a lot. I'm so glad I did it this way instead of trying to do it as a hamburger. We've had the wettest, coldest winter. For a long time. That's why I haven't been doing much stealth camping. And the raining's returning tomorrow night, so I had to come tonight if I wanted to stay dry. Now, another way that I know that Jesus loves stealth is because he has a feast called the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, which is the Feast of Stealth Shelters, for 7 days. People, the Israelites, and in the future millennium, people will have to go to the mountains, cut down leafy branches like I've done, build a booth like I've done, and sleep in it for 7 days. And they do this around this time of the year, which I'm going to be doing at the end of this month of September. So you can ask yourself why, and now Jesus was the one who came up with this idea of these feasts. Jesus and God. Why would they have a feast dedicated to stealth camping in a booth of branches? And if you don't believe it's a booth of branches, just go and read Leviticus 23. Go and have a look at Nehemiah. I think it's right about chapter 4, where they discover the book of the law, and it tells them, oh, this is the feast of stealth shelters. You must go and build a stealth shelter. And the people did that, and they went into their roofs and in the pavements and in their enclosed areas, wherever they could find a piece of land, they built a booth. And the people of Israel in Nehemiah's time, when they discovered this book explaining the law, they went and kept this feast of booths or stealth shelters. So why would God be so keen and excited that he would actually tell people, not only Israelites, the Israelites were pretty poor at keeping this, but Christ says when he returns, all nations will keep the Feast of Tabernacles. They will send representatives to Jerusalem to keep this feast in booths for the whole duration of the millennium. Shows it wasn't a Jewish only feast at all. It's a feast that pictures when Christ returns, every building will be knocked down. It'll be a disaster. And what do people do in disasters? They build booths and stay in them. So to remind people of what it was like when Christ returned, every year they're going to stay in booths, and a representative from every nation and groups of people from every nation are going to come to Jerusalem to keep the feast. Of stealth shelters. And any nation that doesn't come up, they won't get any rain that year. That's how serious, that's how God's going to enforce that people keep the feast. And I'm sure some person's going to say in the millennium, when they don't come up and they don't get rain, oh, well, it's El Nino or global warming. No, it's God cursing them. Any nation won't obey God, they'll just get cursed. With no rainfall for that year. I'm sorry, I want to finish this because A, it's so yummy, and B, there is a caracal around, which is like a little mountain lion, and I'd rather eat this than have the smell lingering around for him to get all hungry and want to come in here. I'm sure he would not bother. I have seen this caracal, and at times it may be a female, at times they have cubs, and other people spot them. But if possible, you want to not even have a scent. If someone say they have a late night with their dog, so you want to kind of, if you can, get rid of the scent from your food. So you have a whole feast dedicated to stealth camping. I think one of the things I've noticed over the decades of stealth camping and keeping the feast pictures, you've got your feet lightly anchored in this world. And this world fades away, so you'll see the leaves of your booth fade and get withered over the 7 days of this feast. So it pictures the temporary transientness of mortal life. And then on the 8th day after the feast, called Shemini Atzeret, people go back into permanent dwellings, which pictures the permanent, everlasting lifestyle that's going to follow the millennium. And all that is mortal is going to be burnt up. And I think this is what people who live in booths used to do. They used to probably burn their booths at the end of the feast, get rid of the sticks and the leaves and whatever. And then you're left with what is permanent. Which is what follows the millennium, which is the permanent reign of Christ, where everything is spiritual, everything mortal will be burnt up. And then New Jerusalem will come to earth and God will live with man. Well, man turned into spirit beings. Some of the brighter stars are coming out. So what I've got to do is pump up my airbed. Well, I saw 10 satellites and 1 shooting star. Beautiful, the constellation of Scorpio just above me, the Southern Cross and the pointers. Could hear baboons bocheming in the distance for quite a time. And then there's a stream running down below, but otherwise it's just perfectly still, beautiful night. Can see the Milky Way clearly, as I say, it's the constellation of Scorpio, then the Southern Cross with the 2 pointers, Alpha and Beta Centauri. Absolutely gorgeous night out. Yeah, airbed makes it beautifully comfortable, blow up mattresses, it's not too cold. So I'm going to say goodnight.